So I do think that the Soviet Union has its eyes, and maybe it'll wait 10, 20 years. It's waited several hundred. It can afford to wait 10, 20 more years for the situation in Pakistan to further deteriorate, even further than it has already. Yes?
Given your three wishes, how would you guide American foreign policy towards the situation in Afghanistan as it is now?
Well, beyond the grapes and the cherries, I have one just basic wish, and that is that I think that the United States should encourage the shipment of surplus Soviet arms that are available in Egypt and in China to Afghanistan. And although this sounds like a very radical statement in the post-Vietnam era, we must remember that all the time while we were conducting SALT I and the détente policies under Kissinger, the Soviet Union was supplying North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. And it didn't seem in any way to interfere with the warming up and increasing cordiality of relations between our country and that country at that time. So I feel that what the Afghan freedom fighters need, I believe that the 99% of that population, I know, and again, I return back to the information I gave about my personal involvement in that country. I know a great deal of the freedom fighters, both inside and outside the country. I know they're committed. I know that they're going to continue to fight, even if they don't have the weaponry. And they're probably going to get massacred as a result. I think given the fact that they're going to fight, it'd be a much more interesting skirmish there, or battle, were they to enjoy the possession of weapons that would be able to combat the tanks and primarily those helicopter gunships that the Soviet Union are using against their guerrilla tactics. So if I had my wish, I'd like to see us encourage even more than we have, if we have at all, the movement of those kinds of weapons, essentially the individually harnessed SAM-7 heat-seeking weapons that can bring down tanks and helicopter gunships. It's an interesting point to add here that one of the freedom fighters in a conference that we held in Omaha in May, bringing a number of these groups together for the purpose of trying to demonstrate some kind of solidarity for the media primarily, an individual who had only attended through the school through the 8th grade said, can't understand the United States, he said. Here we have a situation in which your interests are linked with the interest of the majority of the population of a country. Usually you're on the inside trying to hold off the insurgents in some way. Here the insurgents have interests that are linked to your own interests, long-term interests, at least as I perceive them. In other words, at least as he said he perceived those. And he said, don't you understand what the continual involvement in Vietnam did to your economy? He said, don't you think that what you're suffering right now is not just an expression of the economic realities of today, but is also a part of a continuation of that particular impact upon your society? Don't you understand what might happen to the Soviet Union if they were left fighting on the Hindu Kush mountains for 10 years, what impact that might have on their economy? And, I have to admit that the guy has a point there that certainly needs consideration. And I wonder really whether or not we have considered that. Some people think it's irresponsible to suggest that we might even be involved in the fashion that I have even suggested here. But, there's a people over there who are experiencing genocide. The Soviet Union is essentially using Afghanistan for the same purposes that Hitler used Spain before the Second World War. And they're using chemical warfare in that country. They're using what are called anti-dissident weapons that they have developed because I think they're concerned about the possibility of dissidents within their own borders, in Tajikistan or some places through the end, maybe towards the end of this century. And so it's a good opportunity for them to practice and to utilize their materials. They're not having as much success as I think they'd like to have in Afghanistan, or it would probably be over by now, given the disparity of resources that each side has. But I feel that we should certainly be thinking, I think, about this much more than we have. Yes?
You mentioned chemical warfare. Do you believe the Soviet Union?
Do I believe Soviets? Yes, I do.
On what basis? Besides reports from the United States press.
No, my reports don't come at all from the United States press on that. They come from the freedom fighters themselves. Now, of course, you might have to view that with some skepticism because they are the obvious victims. They're describing their own selves. But the kinds of conditions that they are describing, that they are undergoing when the use of a certain kind of yellow haze or something that's sprayed over them, or it seems very much to me like, and I think to many others as well. And as well, there's also some kind of a green gas. I don't know, whether or not they're using this particular gas that has been said to have been used in Cambodia, etc., that is totally lethal. It might just be like a mustard gas or something of this nature. But others think that they are using a more sophisticated gas. A number of us told our State Department that we believe that the Soviets used gas in the campaign against the Salang Tunnel in August of 1979. The Afghan freedom fighters occupied the tunnel that links northern Afghanistan with southern Afghanistan. It's the world's highest tunnel. It's the only road between the north and the south, and it's the transit road, of course, for the bringing in of military weaponry. The Afghan freedom fighters were able to occupy that. I was watching that with great interest because, you see, the only way you can remove the freedom fighters from in that tunnel, because the tunnel itself is not just solely carved out of the rock. It is a constructed tunnel as well. In other words, there are areas where there's no mountain that they have to construct tunnels, and they have sort of a, what do we call these? Well, it's sort of like slats that you can see into the thing. The only way they could really do that without destroying at least parts of this tunnel, of course, is to use chemical warfare. Well, they retook the tunnel, and they never, and transit activities never ceased. And so we were claiming that the Soviets are already using chemical warfare. Of course, we made that analysis ourselves. The Afghan freedom fighters have been claiming that the use of gas, etc., since April of last year, and so April of '79. So in January of this year, people in the State Department confirmed finally that they felt that it was true, that they did use gas there. So that's the kind of report that I have. I think that a lot of others have accepted it. We can't, of course, accept that just because the freedom fighters tell me that, or we make this analysis. But I think many things point to it, and I think that a lot of other analysts, not only from the United States, but also from Europe, allude to this particular use of gas. And I think, it's difficult to prove things when you have a country that's essentially sealed off from the media for the exploration of that. People aren't as fortunate as Dave Klein to sort of get in there in the fashion that he did. I commend him for that. I think he's pretty gutsy. Yes, Jim? Mm-hmm. I'm somewhat dismayed by this too. Initially, of course, the Indian government indicated under Christ, he's gone only a few months. I can't remember his name now. Morarji Desai, that they felt this was a threat. But they didn't really go too deeply into this because, of course, they were right in the midst of their political campaign, and Indira was seeking to get back into government in late December, early January. And then, of course, when she came in, she made a couple of statements, too, that to me seemed to be a departure from her approach to the past, in which she was also indicating that maybe there was a difficulty in the future for India. But then since that time, she's gone 180 degrees the other way. And I predicted that she would. And I don't mean to say that I'm a great prophet. That is not the point at all. I guess I was predicting that because I was fearing the worst and hoping it wouldn't occur. Because I feel that India, probably more than any country in the world, the opinion of India in this particular situation is more important than the opinion of almost any other country in the world with regards to what the Soviet Union might do, because of India's standing within the Third World, within the United Nations, and with the kind of relationship that the Soviet Union is trying to cultivate with India because of the deterioration of its relationship with China. And I just don't know. I think that Indira really prefers to have the United States around as a whipping boy more than just about any other thing that she needs to resort to when there is a problem internally that she needs to take attention away from. And I am a bit flabbergasted because I think that if Pakistan would fall or would become a totally anarchical situation there, that India is bound to suffer, because India cannot divorce itself from the religious and ethnic dynamics of that part of South Asia. You know, perhaps the greatest tragedy in that part of the world is that there ever was a Pakistan, or that there ever was a Bangladesh, that, you know, that those individuals who were the disciples of Gandhi were unable, because of their own egos or other problems brought upon by the British presence there prior to that, unable to keep that whole place together, because it only has encouraged, I think, continuing such a disintegration of the society. I think that you know, any reasonable individual would have to really wonder what the heck Indira is doing there, because she's sort of broken off her initiative to China, which I thought might bring about a move away from this sort of dependence upon the Soviet Union that she seems to have involved herself in with there. Can we try somebody else who hasn't had a chance, but if there isn't somebody else, then I'll... Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, the question is that I indicated that the real crisis in Iran would come after the resolution of the hostage issue. And by saying that, I didn't mean in any way to diminish the tragedy or the importance of that particular situation. In fact, the man Bruce Langan, who is the head of our mission, or what was our mission to Iran, is a very close personal friend of mine. Individual whom I knew from Afghanistan. We both served there at corresponding times. But I feel that if you take a look at Iran, in much the way I described the situation in Pakistan, and if just for picture's sake in your mind, construct a box, a square, and you take each corner of that square, and you take, let's say, the one in the upper left-hand corner, and you consider that most of the people living in that particular part of Iran are Turks or Kurds, and that they're Sunnis, they're not Shias. And then you go down to the lower left-hand corner, and you consider that most of the people in that particular part of the country are Arabs, and are a number of whom are Sunnis, but they're Arabs and not Iranian. And then you go over to the lower right-hand corner, and you recognize that most of those are Sunni Baluchis. And then you go up into the upper right-hand corner and you recognize that most of those are Turkmens. And then you recognize that in the center of what's left, those are where the Iranians are. And even in that, there are pockets of groups that have been seeking autonomy or certain autonomous prerogatives in the past. The Luris, the Bakhtiaris, and things of this nature, Kashgais. So you have in that country a situation where under the Shah, through the maintenance of whatever kind of presence that his military had there, at least some stability, whether it was at a great sacrifice in human rights or not, is a matter I suppose that will go on for debate for a long time. But in any case, it was a country that was not at that time beset by autonomous movements. The feelings may have been there, but their movements weren't. And so I think what we see right now in Iran is a situation where the government, well, what is a government, first of all? And then, you know, we're beyond the Ayatollah, which is the other element, I think, which is helping to hold the country together, obviously, that and the sort of the hostage issue, the external threat that maybe is posed by the hostage issue, or at least in the minds of peoples because of it. You know, once those particular things are removed, I wonder what it is that's going to hold Iran together. I mean, I really have grave doubts that it'll be able to, because it will have a military that has essentially disintegrated. Most of the political and social institutions have gone through tremendous change to the point where they're, in many ways, at a lower stage of development than maybe they were back in 1950. And so I think that that's the real potential for crisis. And I think that, quite frankly, the Soviet Union is in an excellent position to take advantage of that particular situation, if indeed it develops the way it is. So that's that. Yes?
What are your thoughts on what America's foreign policy should be to Iran once the hostages are released?
Once the hostages are released? I think, quite frankly, that we ought to try to find ways to seek, the motivation or the moving of our interests on parallel lines with the Iranians. It may not be possible. If, for example, Bani Sadr does emerge as the power in the government, I think it will be possible. If Mr. Rajaei, a man who's the prime minister who Walter Cronkite, the father of our country, calls Rajaei, if he was, emerges, then I don't think it will be possible, because there won't be the institutions there that will probably make possible the conducting of normal diplomatic considerations. One might suggest that we support some kind of coup or something of that nature. I think that really that might be a very, it's at least fraught with more risks than not. I think the Iranians need to try and develop their own future for themselves, so that they do not feel that the United States is the element within their history that is dictating the way they go. I think, quite frankly, that the United States did not have as much of a role in a lot of what they say happened in their country as we are told, because I think that one has to remember that Iranians, in the finer analysis, that yes, our support made certain things possible, but the Iranians themselves are the ones that made the decision, and the Shah himself did too, and his people who worked for him. And I really believe very, very strongly about that. Yes. Oh, thank you for asking, because I almost forgot. Wherever I speak, I'm always asked about what is being done about the Afghan refugees. And there are more than 1 million of them in Pakistan. And there is a national organization that has been created called the Afghanistan Relief Committee, whose address is right there. If you're interested in making contributions to this particular organization, which is tax-free, and by the way, which has 7 senators on its board of directors, and I think 6 congressmen, and James Michener and Lowell Thomas, and people like that, and myself, that you might want to direct your support in that direction. The money goes to the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Or if you feel that you don't have money to give to that, then you might write to your congressman to support the commitments made in Congress for assistance to the Afghan refugees. Now, when I talk about the Afghan refugees here, I'm talking about a situation a bit apart from the Afghan freedom fighters, although I suspect that a number of the refugees who are in Pakistan make the trip back and forth across the border. But in any case, we're talking primarily about the families of people like this. We've had a large number of refugees come to the United States, not anything in the total, the Southeast Asians or the Cubans. We have 80 Afghans living in Omaha. They've come through Afghanistan, escaped under the most incredible circumstances. This one man came with his 7 children and his wife through 3 days of walking and sneaking, and a family that was with them 3 of its members were shot down by Soviet helicopter gunships as they were trying to go across just prior to the time they got to the Pakistani border. So I've lost a great number of my friends who had been in previous governments, or who were not in governments but were sympathetic to maybe the freedom fighters, and they've either disappeared or they have been executed. And so a lot of Afghans, I think even more Afghans, as the genocide in Afghanistan increases, will be seeking to escape across the border into Pakistan and maybe also into Iran. So I thank you for asking me about that, because I think that needs some attention, obviously. Yes, Young? Okay. I see 2 more questions. I'll take 2 more, okay? And then if you don't prohibit me, I'll stay around while others leave. Okay. Young, you're first. Since you're younger than this. Only by virtue of his name. His name is Young. Okay, go. Mm-hmm.
What would the U.S. gain by giving him asylum? What kind of difficulty would the U.S. have in pursuing Frank Gates out of Afghanistan?
I see something developing there, sort of like Cardinal Mindszenty's residence in the embassy in Budapest. Huh? What we have to gain, really, quite frankly, I think, is what the freedom fighters might gain out of this. In other words, what happens again is that Afghanistan, after moving to sort of the back pages of the news, has come to the front pages again. And the Soviet military presence in Afghanistan is again gained attention. And so I think that's the greatest gain. I think also the fact that the man has asked for asylum and his life is probably in danger sort of, compels us, forces us really to recognize his particular situation and to provide for him. Now, I'm, of course, very familiar with the American Embassy in Kabul, and as you've read, the American Embassy has been surrounded by Afghan police and security people. And I think people within the embassy are concerned about their security. I am too. It's a rather vulnerable place. It just has an iron, pipe kind of fence around it. And there are just a few Marines there guarding the embassy, like in most embassies around the world. So I think it's fraught with some danger, but I think it's something that, again, it's a matter of principle, I feel. And I feel, as melodramatic as that sounds these days in our cynical world, I think we need to stand for some of those things. And I think that this individual's life is in danger. We need to do something about it. I think it also would help a situation that would help us. So in our self-interest, in the interest of the Afghans, and of course in the interest of this individual's life, I think we should continue to stand fast on that particular issue. Now, you were next.
Yes, care to address yourself to this question? Is Reagan going to be any better in the foreign policy area than some people think Carter has?
Well, here we have a guy who, managed just 2.5 or 3 weeks ago to conduct a campaign on his own behalf in which he had the issue essentially at the time focused on the individual whom he was opposing, Carter. And by his statements with regards to Taiwan and China, of course, he turned it all around and he became, the individual, Reagan, became an issue. In other words, his capacity to speak with any degree of rationale on major issues. He created an issue out of one that didn't exist before, and an issue that is very divisive for him. And my particular feeling is that I know it's sort of chic these days to say, well, we're confronted with situations in which none of it's good. None of the choices are the only one that I want, or none of the above, or something of this nature. I don't know. I have strong personal feelings about these things. I know one thing, that I worked for Jimmy Carter in 1976 in Council Bluffs, living in Omaha, and I feel very much like the proverbial woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like that woman scorned. And I feel in many ways, not just in terms of foreign policy, that we have been let down tremendously by an individual who I just don't think has the capacity, this is my opinion, the capacity to administer a government. I think it's unfortunate. I don't know that Reagan or Anderson, either one of those two have the capacity either. I don't think that we're really given much of a choice, obviously. I don't know that any of the candidates in any of the primaries were really, that I thought of all of the people running, that the individual who had the most knowledge of things international was George Bush, but I don't know that I would have sided with some of his domestic stands. And I think it's very important, however, for us to have an individual who has a global understanding and perspective. I thought Bush, by virtue of his experience with the CIA, with the United Nations, with China, as closely approximated that as any individual. I sort of feel betrayed, really, by a situation which I supported and have found to be wholly inadequate. And it's very disappointing to me. My own experiences were such during this last year that I came into very close contact with the highest levels of that government, except for the president himself. And I was very disappointed when one of these individuals, and I won't give his name here, but let me tell you, it's at the very highest level of foreign policy consideration, asked me whether or not I thought that the Afghanistan situation was going to be the Soviet Union's Vietnam. I said that I was flabbergasted that he would even suggest such a thing. The individual who was, at least amongst the very most prominent person in the formulation of our foreign policy. In Vietnam, we did not share a border with that country like the Soviet Union does with Afghanistan. In Vietnam, we had to be concerned about public opinion. I don't really see right now where that's a grave concern to the Soviet system. And of course, in Vietnam, the most important thing, there were three powers involved: China, the Soviet Union, and the United States. As yet, the United States really hasn't involved itself in any way in which the Soviet Union involved itself in the Vietnam situation. So I also, one of these individuals, and this was a real shock to me, when he was talking about the Muslim minority of Afghanistan who opposed the government of Hafizullah Amin. Well, you know, the Muslim minority is 99.9% of the population. I don't know how many you have to be a majority. And it just shows you the lack of understanding that this particular individual, who is a lawyer and who is now, you know, in a very prominent position in the formulating of our foreign policy, you know, how much he understood things. Well, he was probably getting information from some person now because he was having to react to a situation. He really didn't have the information, and he was out spouting things as he remembered them from the top of his head, and he didn't do a very good job of it. So I really believe that our foreign service, by the way, is one of the best bureaucracies and most talented bureaucracies we have. But you see, little that goes on with our foreign policy utilizes this resource. Our foreign policy is conducted by getting input from people like Hamilton Jordan, who still doesn't know how to pronounce his name correctly. I saw a bumper sticker the other day which said Hamilton Jordan is a jerk. Lloyd Cutler, who's a lawyer, Rosalind Carter, and then previously was Cyrus Vance and this guy, what the heck, the undersecretary, what? Walter Christopher. These individuals, and you know, none of whom have had any real experience. You know, the closest we come, of course, is the professor Brzezinski. And although I come from a university campus, and I know this is blasphemy to say such a thing in front of a university-based audience, I really don't think that university professors should be secretaries of state. I think that they should have a prominent role in making in advising or being national security chiefs. I think that one of the best examples of this was Henry Kissinger. He did some very interesting things. He had a lot of what I would call headline successes, but we have to remember that he did not leave us with much of a foreign policy. He left us with a couple of things that, to me, are very disastrous. One of his biggest, movements in terms of development of foreign policy was something called GLOP, G-L-O-P. It's an acronym. It means it's an acronym for global placement. And as a result of this particular policy, which he initiated, we have individuals who are trained in South Asian studies serving in Latin America and vice versa all the way around the world. And, that's not the way to develop. Why did he do that? Well, because he was not a man who understood administration. He didn't know how to, he ran into considerable opposition with some of the policies that he was seeking to develop in the Persian Gulf and elsewhere. And so he fired those ambassadors, individuals, by the way, a couple of whom I know. And he decided, since he wasn't able to get them to come up with the kinds of advice or be the kind of resource I think that he wanted to fit into his doctoral dissertation view of what the world should be, that he thought that GLOP was the best approach, which means that he didn't use the State Department after that at all. He made his decisions at the very highest level. And I think, that's a very dangerous thing. I'm saying this, by the way, because I've been saying a lot of things against the Carter administration. I want you to know that I wish a plague on both their houses, and that I feel that basically the conducting of foreign policy, unfortunately, within the last decade and even before that, and possibly since Dean Acheson, has been a rather amateurish enterprise when you consider the continuity that countries like the Soviet Union or France or others have had in their conducting of foreign policy. Not always successful, but at least the continuity, so that people understood what was going on, and so that they were able to develop a cadre of real professionals in the foreign service. I don't think we've had that, unfortunately. I think it's unfortunate because I think we really have some very talented people in that foreign service. It's a very small bureaucracy, comparatively speaking. For any individual who has any managerial talent whatsoever, he should be able to use that to his advantage and use people like Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and others to come in with advice on certain concepts maybe that would be appropriately studied to offer some kinds of positions. It might be a devil's advocate position or something of that nature. But I really wonder if it's intelligent for us to conduct foreign policy by bringing in people every 4 years whose initial steps in the conducting of foreign policy seem to be to distance themselves as much as possible from what the previous 4 years were. Have we always been that full of mistakes every 4 years that we need to just turn things around so much? The continuity is a little weak. Okay.
No, I'm afraid we're going to have to break in. Thank you, Rudy Ayers, for his lecture this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.